Hello, my name is Rika O'Connor, and this is my research proposal. Um, it is entitled Universal Design for Learning to Support Retention and Generalization of Standards-Based Math Content for Students with Significant Intellectual Disabilities or Disability. So, my educational problem stems from, in the last 15 or 20 years, the push for a more rigorous content, standard-based curriculum for students with significant disabilities. Um, and the question and the concern is it's great. The kids are being exposed, but the question is, are they learning it? And if they're learning it, are they retaining it? And even beyond that point, once they've learned it, if they've retained it, can they use it or can they generalize it? Is this information that they are able to use in, hopefully a real world setting, as they go out of the educational setting into life? So my purpose statement is, the purpose of this research is to use an existing UDL-based application, VISL, to examine the time frame individual students need to retain content and compare that to the time frames issued by school districts in their pacing guidelines. An additional purpose of the study is to evaluate the generalization of content across formats. Are students with significant intellectual disabilities able to generalize what they've learned across presentation formats? So schools and districts produce pacing guides, but these pacing guides are designed for average students. The question here is, what about students with disabilities? They're still, in most situations, at least in my own teaching and professional experience, being held to these pacing guides that give a classroom teacher the opportunity to, introduce content and teach it for a matter of a few days, and then you move on. In my own experience, that is simply not sufficient. So our method, it's a single subject study using students chosen through non-probability criterion-based purposeful sampling. So they are students who have an IQ below 70. And really the second criteria is that they can use a digital device independently. Even if they can't get to the VISL app on their own, once they're there, they can navigate through this VISL app on their own. And I can report that within my school, all of my students can navigate independently through the VISL app. It's a newer application, but it is one that students have in my school district become quite familiar with in last year. So the students will be assigned very specific math content standards that are based on where they are currently functioning. Ideally, we can look at their IEP goals and identify this, because ideally their IEP goals are based on their current level of functioning. If not, there are other ways to determine the student's current functioning. And the students will engage with the content 3 to 5 times a week for 15 to 20 minutes per session, at least 15 to 20 minutes per session, over the course of 4 weeks, or until the student scores a 90% accuracy in 3 separate trials. This means that, for instance, a student is working on addition with numbers 0 through 9. They will be given a visual assignment that is targeted to that content, and they will engage with that assignment 3 to 5 times a week. And once they have scored, once the data collected through Vizl describes their, what is the word I'm looking for? Their performance or their understanding is 90% correct over 3 trials, then we can move on. The student will then also, once we move past the teaching or the intervention stage, there will begin a period of time where once a week for 4 weeks, student will then be re-given that same content on Vizl to see if they've retained the information, but also a paper-based assessment that is written using the same basic content, the same math, addition with numbers 0 through 9 to see if not only did they retain their knowledge from Vizl, but they also can generalize it, like, oh, I see this addition problem here. I can answer it. So the participants will be identified as having a significant intellectual disability. Their IQ is below 70, and they're being taught math content standards using Vizl. Data is collected throughout the learning portion of the study, and Vizl actually collects that data. Participants will be from a single public pre-K through K elementary school. They qualify under the 2 criteria that I mentioned before. Their IQ is below 70, and they can operate the Vizl app independently on either a laptop, desktop, or iPad. And the students are currently being educated in either a self-contained ASD classroom setting, or there is also a co-teach model gen ed classroom where some students are the second grade students within this school setting are being educated. The setting is a public pre-K through 5 elementary school. They will participate in the research study within their regular classroom with their regular classroom teacher, and during their regular math time. So it's not going to be disruptive, and the classroom teachers and paraprofessionals are the same people they interact with on a daily basis. So the independent or the intervention, goodness gracious, the intervention or independent variable is the learning or engaging with the content on Vizl. I can actually show you very quickly. This is one way that you can, this is Vizl, and this is within one of my students, and how you can customize it to the student. You can allow them, you can set it up for how they interact, the number of choices, whether they can exit the lesson independently or have to complete it through to the end. Text to speech, they can interact with a switch, use a screen reader. Then there are reinforcers, themes, celebration, seasonal filters, which I really don't deal with. Hold on 1 second. Let me go back to, oh my goodness. Okay. So some of the lessons allow for errorless learning. and others, have 2 or 3 answer choices that the students select from, and the data is taken by Vizzle, and you get updates as the students complete it, and it communicates the amount of time the students are taking as well. The dependent variables are the performance of the students on the post-tests, both through Vizzle and the paper-based assessment. The Vizzle assessment data is collected through Vizzle. The paper-based assessment will be created using the same content standards the student is learning on the Vizzle app and will be delivered using a traditional pencil and paper format. The weekly assessments will then be compared to the highest data point from the learning period. So if, say, over 4 weeks, a student never made it to 90% proficiency, that's fine. We can still continue and compare their assessment portion of the data to the highest score that they had achieved throughout the intervention stage. Implementation procedures. Once the students are identified, current math content areas is identified, and 2 assignments for those content areas will be assigned through Vizzle. So Vizzle allows you to present a number of assignments on the same content area, but the assignments will be the same throughout the study. The student will see the same 2 assignments, and it's really because some of them can go rather quickly, and the idea behind having 2 is to allow the students to have time to actually sit with the content. So again, they'll at least 3 times a week for no less than 15 minutes per session. They're assessed on the content at 1-week intervals for a total of 4 weeks. And they're assessed using the app as well as the paper-based assessment. And the paper-based assessment will be 5 questions that cover the same math content learned through Vizzle, but delivered in the alternate format. Validity and reliability. So, someone driving through my neighborhood. One of the ones I selected was history. I actually think, very easily control for fire drills, safety drills, or special events at the school by just being cognizant of the calendar. And because we're interacting with the content at a minute, 3 days a week, if necessary, we could always schedule, an off day on a day that's going to be strange. Say we have a student assembly or something along those lines. Participation attrition, it should be easy to avoid. It's a quick study. It's roughly 2 months from start to finish. And students, it's rare that they leave with no notice, move, but again, the short time frame should be easy to deal with. And the experimental effects, because the teachers within this district have all been trained on Vizzle and have it up and running in their classrooms, there should be no issue with that, because really it's a technology-based intervention. So a teacher's not necessarily interacting or having an effect on how the student is interacting with the software. Now, if a student is having a particular off day, the hope would be that maybe we would choose a different day to participate. But that's one of those things you encounter in the process. And the paper-based assessments will be provided. They will be created and provided